This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast. Ecosystem building is a subset of economic development that focuses on fostering entrepreneurial activity in a community. Today's guest is Dave Rippe. Dave has been building the ecosystem of Hastings, Nebraska for over a decade and has also led economic development for the state of Nebraska. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Nick.
Yes, yeah. Most people I interview, I don't have like an existing relationship with. So it is nice that we were kind of talking about before that we had planned to do a podcast collaboration before COVID hit, and that was going to be a live event. But yeah, we've definitely known each other for quite some time. So I'm happy to have you on the show. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I was kind of reflecting on the very first time we met, and you were with your dad. And as some of your viewers might know, listeners might know, your dad was the CFO for Cabela's, and we were talking about how we were going to rebuild an ecosystem in Sydney, following the fallout of Cabela's, and it's just it's fascinating that was our very first conversation, and here we are.
Yeah, yes. I think I've maybe alluded to the fact that my dad worked for Cabela's, but I definitely hype up the Sydney pride. The rural community. My co-host of this show, she's from a rural town in Wisconsin, so it's just kind of interesting how those the environment you grew up in does affect the trajectory of your whole life. Yeah, but so Dave, our first question we kind of ask everyone is, how did you get into economic development and this field? And even though we've known each other for quite some time, I don't know the answer to that question. So how did you get started in this?
Well, I don't know if anyone goes to school for economic development. At least smart people probably don't. Smart people, I think, go into healthcare administration or things like that. But I was working for our state legislature, and I'd worked with a startup company where I'd worked to try and commercialize some technology out of the university with some folks that I went to grad school with. And so I had a little bit of experience with startup work, and the Department of Economic Development for the state was hiring a business recruiter. And I thought that kind of sounded cool. I didn't know what that meant. And so I went to work for the Department of Economic Development. And in that capacity, I got to go out all across the state and meet with different communities and see what was happening on the ground in cities, towns, villages all across Nebraska. And it was just incredibly eye-opening for me to see all of these amazing little pieces across our state, these small towns, communities, private entities, everything. And I got a phone call from the Economic Development Group in Hastings, and they asked my wife and I to come out and meet with them, and we did. And we fell in love with the opportunity here. And so for a little over 7 years, ran the Economic Development Corporation in Hastings, a partnership with the businesses in the community here, and really just became a part of the community. Governor Ricketts asked me to come and run the state's Department of Economic Development. Did that for a couple of years and really just felt this strong calling in our souls to come back to Hastings and just roll up our sleeves and give it our own shot here, right? We've been telling people for 10 years the importance of starting businesses and putting your money where your mouth is. And, you can only sell something for so long before you kind of probably just better buy it yourself. So here we are.
Yeah, yes. So you had no connection to Hastings when they reached out?
No, in fact, we'd come here on a couple projects. I'd been through the community. Every kid, every Nebraska kid, came through Hastings when they were little to play basketball or do different things. But, I tell people we moved here and we only knew one person. And so a month into us living here, I actually went to a conference with that one other person that I kind of knew, the guy that recruited me to come work out here. And my wife locked herself out of our house, and I was 6 hours away, and we knew no one. And so, that's kind of sums up our first month in Hastings, is that it was all about just meeting new people and kind of building our own network. But yeah, we had no other reason to be here.
Interesting. And Dave, so this next question I have my own answer to. But what's one thing about Hastings that people may not know from the outside looking in?
Well, if you're not from Nebraska, you probably wouldn't have any reason to know that Kool-Aid was invented here. And so Hastings, Nebraska, birthplace of Kool-Aid. That's one deal. If you're from Nebraska, you might or might not know that Eileen's cookies were invented here, and this is the home of Eileen's cookies, and so we do sugar pretty well here in Hastings, from cookies to Kool-Aid.
I love Eileen's cookies. Being a Nebraskan, they're top quality cookies. Didn't know they're from Hastings. And my answer to this question, Dave, is just how vibrant the downtown area is in Hastings. And every time there's so many just like, it's like the hipster capital of Nebraska almost. Like it's a place like young people do like hang out at, and there is like just cool culture, and there's a cool vibe to the area that without like before spending a time in Hastings and the first few times I went as a young adult, I was surprised at just how cool it was downtown. So that's my answer.
So that's the answer that I would be most fond of. That's where our heart's at. Beyond cookies and Kool-Aid, the downtown in this community is an area where we're invested personally, professionally. It is the area of town and the opportunity that ultimately engaged us the most with this community, and probably what stoked our entrepreneurial fire the most. And so it's where our office is, and it's where we spend every day is downtown. So we're very fond of it.
Yeah, yes. There's a lot of entrepreneurial activity happening in that downtown. So besides yourself and your business, which I would also be interested in you elaborating more on that. But what other new businesses have stemmed in both the downtown area and beyond throughout Hastings?
Yeah, so when it comes to a lot of these rural communities, and I told a lot of folks this when I was with the state's Department of Economic Development. No one's coming into your community to save you, right? Like if you don't figure it out yourself, you're kind of on your own. And so I think there's been a great realization of that here, and we do have a strong entrepreneurial culture in this community, that I would say has been reinvigorated in the last 10 years. And so in our downtown, it takes the form of restaurants, it takes the form of breweries. We've got an amazing soap and I mean everything from soap to froth bombs, Pacha soap. You'll find them in Whole Foods and stores across the country. But also like some super entrepreneurial not-for-profits. So I do think that as you look in our downtown, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to it, from how the community supports the redevelopment of real estate to financing tools and everything. A very entrepreneurial culture right here.
Yes, yeah, and then could you also elaborate on the business you started and have been growing for the past few years?
Yeah, so we started, now 5 years ago, we started a kind of a real estate redevelopment group with some friends. And so we bought a small building and fixed it up and did some apartments and opened up some commercial bays. And then that hobby kind of turned into a business, right? So we bought the building next to it and redid it. We bought the building next to it and redid it. We bought the building across the street and we're redoing it. And so what we have here, we've got a development company. Queen City Development Company is kind of my part of the house, and that we focus on real estate, but that's kind of grown into lobbying and talent development and some work that I do with the college here, and kind of a lot more than just real estate. It's more of a comprehensive business solutions type business. And then my wife's side of the house is interiors, and which kind of stretches the gamut from some light general contracting to design work to retail components. So, and then Christy also manages all of our real estate. Like it's one thing to be the dreamer. That's my side of the house. Christy's side of the house is actually being the doer. And so she's the one that actually turns things into reality. God bless her.
Yes, yeah. So as one of the, I guess, former leaders, as like, you led the Hastings Department of Economic Development for a period of time, and now I'm sure you're still like a community leader in like you're still a community leader in the ecosystem. What like tools, or have there been tools that have been put in place to encourage people to start their own business, from like grants or loans or educational programming or anything like that?
Yeah, so one of the areas where we had a lot of great success when I was with the development corporation was really just an understanding how to how to put together deals on the financial side. And so that takes a number of forms. And so it takes the ability to bring in private equity to a project. And so we worked a lot with that and motivating private equity in a small community. And that looks different all across our state because of what investor preferences in different geographies. But also like understanding what the public component could be in different fashions. And so patient money, second place money, 0% money, balloon money. I mean, trying to just figure out really different ways to financially structure projects that would meet the needs of companies and really help to accelerate growth. And so I would say that funds that came in through the state that we were ultimately able to utilize, some local incentive funds that, yeah, we've been able to make some grants and we would do things like that, but also just patient debt has been a great tool for economic growth in this community. Beyond that, like we've got a redevelopment authority on the real estate side that's an authority of the city. They have been in the process of, or the practice of buying and holding real estate, taking proposals for redevelopment, and then helping developers with incentives and also just really helping being patient in the process and helpful in the process of redevelopment. And so even just having available real estate and kind of marrying up users and providers on the real estate side has been incredibly helpful too.
Yes, yeah. We talked about like the downtown area of Hastings being like as vibrant as it is. Where are the entrepreneurs hanging out at in Hastings? And are there specific places like bars or coffee shops or co-working spaces?
Yeah, well, right now probably at home still a little bit, huh? But
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
It's kind of been like the great inhibitor of that of the impromptu collision. But I think one of the things that we kind of talk about that's really important, and when you get into the startup literature, it is that density, right? Like of having founders next to founders and having those collisions. And so whether you're reading Brad Feld stuff or whether you're in different cities and you're seeing where these people intermingle, one of the things that is difficult in rural communities, just because you have a lack percentage wise, your founders are less. And so those collisions are fewer. And so I do think like a vibrant downtown is something that benefits our community. And so whether that is at the coffee shops, whether that is at the breweries or whatever, but when you have a small walkable downtown, those types of collisions are much more natural, and you can be passing each other over lunch at a restaurant or passing each other over a beer at a brewery. I do think that it's certainly a benefit for our community.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. What's the name of that coffee shop downtown? The Art Bar, isn't that?
Art Bar, it's where it's at, man. It's, and there's a lot of young energy. It's the college coffee shop, but it's the entrepreneur coffee shop. It's the retired person coffee shop. And so you do have like this super eclectic mix of folks that come in there. And yeah, it is, it's one of the local spots, that's for sure.
Yes, I would live there. If I lived in Hastings, I would be there every day, 7 days a week.
If you looked at me and my wife's monthly expenses, it's probably after the mortgage, like the number two line item is probably Art Bar, total, if I'm being honest.
That's funny. And we normally ask this of like ecosystem builders from bigger communities, but are there any co-working spaces in Hastings?
There aren't currently, and so but we've really identified that as or some iteration of that as a community need, especially the next step for our downtown. And so we do have a collective effort here. There's a realization that that's a necessity. We actually have a building that we own that's under construction right now, where we've done a few different potential layouts for that. We've got a number of partners. As you look at who's a stakeholder in entrepreneurial growth in a community, and we've done a really good job of evaluating that. In our small community, you could list those off as the community foundation on the private philanthropic side, our community college, our four-year college, our city, our economic development group, and even some private sector representatives. There's been a good collection of folks that are trying to figure out, what's the best way to bring not just a co-working space, but an entrepreneurial acceleration space to fruition here. And so I'm really excited about that effort.
Yes, yeah. And we've already kind of touched on like the most successful companies that have been started in Hastings between Pacha Soap, Eileen's Cookies, and Kool-Aid. I kind of consider those being the big three. Are there any more to add to the list?
Uh, I think as you kind of cross the history of Hastings, most of your companies that are here were founded here in some capacity, and so we stretch the gamut on entrepreneurial activity from companies that are 130 years old to one of our friends that just started a business here, started it 6 months ago in the middle of COVID, right? And she's trying to figure out how to make that work. And I think what's neat about a community, a small community, is that all entrepreneurial efforts are celebrated and they're all important as part of the ecosystem. And so our friend Chelsea that started a juicery across down the street from us, right? Like we celebrate Chelsea with the same excitement that we celebrate Pacha's soap because she's out there, she's taking a risk, and she's showing what's possible, and that's it's just as valuable as what Andrew and Abby are doing at Pacha.
Yeah, yes. Celebrating successes is important to do, but not all communities do it. So it's good to hear that that's been a priority in Hastings.
Yeah, if I think if getting out there and you hear the term "bang the drum," but you have to. I do think that I go and I talk to entrepreneurial classes at the college, and you'll talk to students, and you're like, "Hey, what's the what are the biggest impediments to starting your own business?" And oh, it's money, oh, it's risk, and oh, it's this or oh, it's that. And then when you really dive in and you talk through it with them, they start to understand that maybe those impediments aren't as big as what they've been conditioned to believe. And so the group here has done a really great job with like their big idea contests, and we've actually seen businesses form and start out of that. The college has put some resources around kids in the form of some catalyst grants that have helped them launch businesses after they've participated in the big idea contest. And so that's been exciting to see. I've been able to work with a couple of students over the last couple of years. One is now roasting his own coffee, and another young lady, she decided to start her own hula hoop teaching business, and so she manufactures her own hula hoops and teaches classes for kids from 5 to people 65, right? And so it's a neat deal, and like we discussed, it's so important to celebrate the assumption of risk and the willingness to engage in entrepreneurial activities and the idea of being an employer, not an employee, because that risk and everything can be scaled. Even with our buildings, like the very first one we started with a very small building, and then we learned how to compartmentalize risk, how to understand concept, and then we scaled it up. And so I think celebrating that with folks, with individuals, that's so important.
So our next question, we tend to touch on venture capital. So like when we're talking to people from Chicago or bigger cities, like we talk about the venture capital. However, there's not much venture capital happening across the state. And in Hastings, I would guess there's probably not much activity. But you did mention pooling together private equity to kind of help invest in these companies and get them off the ground. What advice would you have to a community the size of Hastings? And what's Hastings' population?
25,000.
25,000, yeah. So yes, yeah. So for a smaller community like that, what is your advice to pool together the resources for such as private equity, to kind of get that aspect of an ecosystem going?
I do think, Nick, there's certainly ways to do it better than we have. I don't think that Hastings has it unlocked or has a great model on the private equity side to go out and parade around the country. I believe, especially in smaller communities, that sometimes access to equity, those with the equity assume that it's easy, right? They assume, oh, well, I'm here. But those without the equity don't know the pathway. And so I do think that especially in smaller communities, the formation of funds, even if it's a few individuals, even if it's just a fund in name and there's just funds, there's just dollars committed into that. But the idea of being public with the formation of funds and letting people know that there is equity to be invested that exists in that ecosystem, I think that's so important because you start to see a pull of projects at that point. We've certainly aggregated capital on an as needed basis for projects, and so you find a project, people get excited about it, you make the same whatever phone calls, and you pull it together and you make a deal happen. But like, I do believe a more sustainable model, a higher ROI model for communities is probably to look at establishing a fund and being very public with the fact that it exists.
Interesting. So along with the importance of like money flowing into an ecosystem, it's also important like in like the textbook ecosystem playbook to have like a storytelling component of like have the entrepreneurial stories be told. Are there any like news outlets or like blogs or podcasts in Hastings that accomplish that?
Yeah, we certainly recognize that necessity when I was with the Economic Development Corporation to get out there and make sure that we tell stories. That torch has really been picked up by Central Community College now out here, and they've got an entrepreneurial program and they've got resources that they're devoting toward that. And so, really highlighting those people that are doing things. They do a lot over social media, they do a lot online in order to let people see who those folks are, put faces and names behind it. We did an effort here in December where we had a couple of the college kids that I work with at Hastings College. They interviewed 26 local businesses and in some short format interviews that we're going to be rolling out here over the next few months. But we also did then a front page feature on those small businesses and entrepreneurs in our local paper for every single day in the month of December. And so on the front page of the local paper, you had a picture and you had a story, and just really trying to like help people understand that when you walk into these businesses, it's the owner on the other side of the desk, and the value of that, and you know the uniqueness of that in some cases.
Absolutely, Dave. So this question is definitely unique to like this conversation. Have you seen with Hastings College has been in Hastings for like ever, like decades, correct?
I think we're coming up on 140 years. Yeah.
Okay, yes, yes. So quite some time. Have you seen more young people stay in Hastings with all of this activity happening and like all of the new business growth and the cultural component? Have more young people stayed after graduating college? Or is there like not enough data, or is that not a metric you're looking at, or what? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I'm a little. I don't know if we have great data on that right now. I know that about gosh 6 or 7 years ago now we hired an individual because we sat down, and it's a small enough school, you know, at 1,000 plus or minus enrolled kids, where you can look at the graduates, and we took a look at graduates over 5 years, and at a small school you can sit down with career services alumni and a few other folks, and you can say, where is Charles at, where's Becky at, and where's and what I think we found over a 5 year kind of rolling average was that we were retaining in the community about 12% of our graduates a year. And that was with no effort from the community to say, hey, you should stay here. And so really over the last 5 plus years, the community's developed more of an effort. In fact, I get an email or two a week from the Economic Development Corporation here on talent that's coming out of the college, really just trying to focus on, you know, telling the graduating students there are opportunities here. Yeah, we want you here. All the students at Hastings College have been given free memberships to the Hastings Young Professionals Group, and so trying to engage them in that in their time here, and then certainly working on their behalf to try and help that talent land here. Now, on the metric side, how that's changed things, I don't know what that answer is. I'm going to hope for the best.
My gut tells me it's helping,
Yeah.
but that's totally from the outside perspective. Okay, so Dave. So last question for you: if I were to move to Hastings tomorrow and wanted to start a business, what is the very first thing I should do?
That's a great question. If you were going to move here tomorrow, I'd have you come into my office, and but you know the neat thing is here you could walk into any number of offices and folks would help you out, and so that's. I think that the Economic Development Group Chamber of Commerce deal, they kind of sit under one roof here, and so there's a great one-stop shop that you can walk into. So the public side's helpful, but the private sector is so motivated here to help encourage people, and I think we see a lot of our business formations start that way with private sector encouragement. You know, I think about the first meeting I was with the founders of Pacha Soap, and that was private sector encouragement saying, hey, whatever you need, we'll write a check. And you know, I think about the breweries and other folks that we know have started businesses. And so I think the beauty of a small town, the beauty of our state is that our size is an advantage, and everyone's a share contact button away, and everyone's so willing to help. And so whether you walk into Hastings, whether you walk into Norfolk, whether you walk into Sydney, you're going to get plugged in really fast, regardless of whose office you stroll into.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more as far as the in how that regards the state of Nebraska, Dave. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the conversation. And where can our audience connect with you at?
We're on the social medias. Christie's shop, Queen City Interiors. Anyone can find me on LinkedIn. I am pretty active on there. Or you can find me at 721 West First Street in Hastings, and I'd encourage anyone to stop out here and visit us.
Amazing, Dave. Well, yes, I look forward to continuing to stay in touch, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Nick. Happy to help.
Now that we've learned about an ecosystem from the person building it, I'm going to link back up with Caitlin to clarify some jargon and take a deeper dive into this community.
Hey Nick, what is up? How was your interview?
Okay, so interview was fantastic. It was fun, as Dave and I obviously touched on it in the interview. I've known Dave for quite some time, so it was good to interview him in this format, on the podcast that I co-host. So that was really fun. And the thing, as I was kind of reflecting back onto the interview, the thing I would have, I wish I would have hyped up more, was I would like to coin Hastings, Nebraska as the hipster capital of Nebraska. It is just a fun, unique vibe. So I kind of mentioned that, sort of in between, a transition, but I would firmly, it may even be in this episode's title, I would firmly like other people to start calling Hastings as the hipster capital of Nebraska. But it was really, I guess, interesting to hear all the work that went into letting these kind of fun hipster vibey, there was a bunch of coffee shops, a bunch of breweries. There's a soap company that it's one of the biggest soap providers or manufacturers for Whole Foods, and they source all the soap from foreign countries and bring them in, and it's all about economic empowerment. That's in Hastings. So Hastings is the hipster capital of Nebraska. You heard it here first on the Ecosystem Builder podcast.
Yeah. Wikipedia page coined by Nick Kastner.
Oh yes, most definitely. If you're listening to this, whether you're from Hastings or you're not from Hastings, from this point forward, Hastings, hipster capital of Nebraska. Eventually the Midwest, potentially. There's a few strong competition with Milwaukee, but we're starting small by declaring it in as Nebraska's.
I'd say stick with Nebraska's, because Eau Claire, Wisconsin is quite hipster as well. I mean, I did come from there, so
yeah. Yes, fair enough.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be fun to do a little a side podcast of most hipster sounds? Oh wow, I think an idea is forming.
Yes, I feel after, because we're coming up on 30 episodes of this show, Caitlin, and I think after in a few months, when we're closer to 50, we're in a decent point, because we talk to all these community leaders throughout the Midwest. I think we're at a decent perspective on what is the most hipster or not. So Hastings is for sure Nebraska's, though. So.
Yes, Hastings. Okay, we will write that down. And then also, that was just really fun. What a fun tangent.
Yeah, yes.
So then, was there anything that you had to look up, with all of that hipster jargon and everything?
So I have a decent, I guess, grasp on his hipster jargon. Throughout the interview, I guess so Eileen's Cookies is a Nebraska, a staple Nebraska cookie company, and they're from Hastings. I didn't know that beforehand. And then Kool-Aid, Kool-Aid growing up. So it was started in Hastings. It's now bought by, we didn't really get into this, but I believe it was bought out by a huge conglomerate. So it's no longer made in Hastings. But yeah. So was there anything I had to look up? I guess I would just crept on. We touched on my favorite. There's just a cool little, it's called the Art Bar. It's just a cool little bar in Hastings. Caitlin, if you're ever passing through Hastings, I'm going to have a whole long list of things that you need to roll through. So, but I crept on the Art Bar's, Instagram just for nostalgia's sake, and then looked up. Dave mentioned at the end, we always ask how, or where can people connect connect with you, and he said just to walk into his office. So I looked up on Google Maps where his office was, and things like that. But there was no words or any concept I had to look up after. But it was fun just kind of giving the overview of Hastings again afterwards.
Fair enough. Do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
Final thought, I guess, is I appreciate the ambition of both Dave and the rest of Hastings community for having a town of 25,000. They have really fostered a unique and vibrant community. And there's so much talk from the mainstream media that these rural communities are just declining and not as vibrant as they once were. But I would say Hastings contradicts all that dialogue. So it is I guess inspiring is the word I'll use to see this work really pay off in Hastings, Nebraska. But that's it on my end, Caitlin. Do you want to read us out?
Sure thing. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ecosystem Builder podcast, which is a product of Mug.News and hosted by Nick Kastner and Caitlin Clays. If you have any questions about today's episode, connect with us on Twitter at Nick Kastner, at Clays Creates, or at Mug.News Official. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. We release episodes every Wednesday morning, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a beat.